That's always a good one. Brilliant. Okay, well, it sounds like this is the sort of star tree keeper team joining us for the Engaging Schools with Tiny Forest webinar. I've kind of, my aim for today really is to give a bit of an overview of the different ways in which individuals, tree keepers, volunteers can engage schools with Tiny Forest, both from a perspective of the location of the school, but also the age, and also to let you know what resources are out there. I know that a lot of you, so I mean, for example, thinking Laura, in terms of what's happening in Leicester, activities with schools are probably already sort of quite high on your radar, but it's just really giving you a bit of an insight into what else you might think about doing, and also just start people thinking who are maybe watching this recording later about different approaches that they can take in terms of working with schools. So this is where I then work out if I hit a button, does anything happen? Oh, hey, go back, go back. There we go. There you go. Some lovely people who you hopefully will be familiar with. Yay. And yeah, Divya and I are a bit of a double act on a lot of these webinars. Divya bringing her breadth of knowledge about working with tree keepers in the past. And then hopefully I'm bringing elements from different aspects of Earthwatch as well. So as well as working with Tiny Forest projects, I work on our schools projects with our emerging scientists, and hopefully looking at the kind of how we work with communities across all our projects. So not only Tiny Forest, but freshwater, naturehood, and a whole range of other things. And I can share any information about any of the above at any later point. Right. When Divya asked me to kind of think about kind of Tiny Forest and engaging with schools, one of the first things that I thought about actually was kind of where does your Tiny Forest currently connect to schools? And the sort of Tiny Forest tends to fall into one of three quite general categories. It's either actually on a school site, it's next to a school, or it's within walking distance of a school. And therefore, I think the way that you will connect schools to the Tiny Forest will differ depending on where the location is. So thinking about if it's on a school site itself, more often than not, all or many of the children would have been involved in the actual planting of the sites. It's hopefully become embedded in the curriculum and they kind of use it on a regular basis, and it's used as a teaching resource. There's the potential for kind of parents and community to see it, particularly thinking about drop-off and pick-up time, and those schools that are really good at sort of promoting things through social media, hopefully we'll get lots of images of their pupils kind of out in the site. So that tends to kind of give you a much kind of easier in, I suppose, particularly if you are if you're a parent or a kind of local community member, or a very budding tree keeper who hopefully has made themselves very visible through that sort of planting day. The next would be if it's a Tiny Forest next to a school, so where there's kind of a very short walk. Often sort of, it can often be, I was thinking actually, for example, Perry Common, although I know there's some challenges, it is literally a short walk from the school to the actual sort of Tiny Forest site. So hopefully, again, there's been an initial connection made via the planting day, and it's potentially an ongoing green space that's available for sessions if the school's able to take people out. There's the opportunity to kind of help and connect through the sort of STEM Ambassadors program, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. And then the idea of having kind of extra parental community help in kind of walking from the school to the site can be useful. Its locality to the school can be helpful in terms of thinking about after school club activities. So sometimes a Tiny Forest that is really close to a school, but not necessarily within the school grounds, presents you with a great opportunity on those kind of wraparound extracurricular type activities. And potentially is a really good way of getting kind of parents and volunteers involved in looking after it. We've also found in a couple of cases, because it's next to the school or near the school, there's the opportunity to link it to other things like nurseries or preschools, or indeed other schools within sort of a shorter walking distance. And then finally, this kind of the idea of a walking distance to a tiny forest still provides opportunities to kind of engage. But the things that you kind of need to think about more with this one are, if they weren't involved in a planting day, there's a bit more of a challenge to think about how they might get more involved. Things like kits, science kit that we've just talked about, or any kind of weeding equipment, things like that. You've got to think a bit further in terms of how they get to the site, and then also who's responsible whilst you're at that site. So I guess the way I look at it is, the further you walk physically away from the school to get to the tiny forest, you will potentially get slightly more challenges around health and safety, around the actual activities that you're doing. And potentially, although not exclusively, I guess the further the school is away from the site, sometimes in teachers' minds, the further away it is from the curriculum. So it provides more opportunity to do the kind of community stuff, and probably it's harder sometimes for the teachers to think about the kind of the curriculum-based activities. So one of the first things that again that I thought of was, okay, so I thought, okay, how far away from the school is the site? So that would impact in terms of what you can do. Obviously, if you're in the school grounds, you've got access to all those school resources literally on your doorstep. The further are you away, the further you have to carry stuff or bring stuff in. The other thing I guess to think about is the age of the children that are involved. So we've put tiny forests on or close to primary and secondary schools. So you've got a whole kind of different range of ages. And I guess for me, there's sort of, I guess, three things that relate to making activities age appropriate. So the first one is just, you need to think about the time and the level of complexity of the activity that you want them to do. Secondly is thinking about how are you going to get them to feedback and share how that experience was, but also what is the stuff they're interested in the first place. And then finally, that it needs to be fun. And if you think about it, this is absolutely true for anyone engaging in a tiny forest, not just kind of children and schools, but it's particularly worth thinking about it when you're looking at the potential activities. I'm just going to make sure my screen doesn't turn off. It's classic, it's this time of day. Please don't turn off, thank you. And again, what I liked about, as you can see from the pictures here, tiny forest involves with a kind of a whole range of different ages. So if you think about the image at the bottom, I'm not sure if any of you were involved in any of the science days that have had some of the younger school children in, but there's all sorts of activities around creating a circle space to have a conversation with some of the younger students, right the way through to there were a bunch of sixth form students who were playing with the kind of weather station kit. So they really wanted to kind of get stuck into some of the technology. The younger children were more interested in how quickly they could run around the outside of a tiny forest, which is equally relevant and equally interesting for each of them. So in terms of the actual activities, obviously sort of taking a step back from this, what you can actually do in the school will depend on the level of engagement of the teachers. And there's a huge kind of caveat around all of this, that is, teachers are incredibly busy individuals who have usually a very full school day. Although what you will find, and I'm sure all of you have experience of this, is there's usually one or two teachers in a school who have an absolute kind of passion around the environment and are the kind of go-to person to connect to with a tiny forest or any kind of activity that you're doing. So it's around trying to find ways to make it easy for them to connect to you. They've already got the passion and the interest. What you need to ensure is that you're not creating extra layers of work, you're finding opportunities almost to take elements of what they do kind of off them. So thinking about these kind of 4 different ways then that you can kind of connect in with schools. So the first one is the curriculum linked activity. So Earthwatch have a range of educational resources and teaching packs that are designed to specifically relate to the curriculum. And I've got a link on the next slide about it. And so in some cases it would be about, is there a way that you can, once you've worked out the teacher that's available, making sure that they're aware of those resources and how they can access them and how they can use them. The second one is thinking about some of the sort of science day, and I know you're all about potentially, a few of you are about to have your kind of citizen science day pack of activities. So how can you think about activities that you could do and how you could go along on a science day to support those activities? And then the sort of the third area, I guess, is also linking into both of the above, is the STEM Ambassadors Programme. So I'm not sure how kind of aware people are of the STEM Ambassador Programme, but schools are generally really interested in finding scientists, in the very broadest sense of the word, to come along and share knowledge and joy of science with the rest of the school. Anyone can become a STEM ambassador who has a kind of a passion or an interest in science. And one of the things that I know that has worked really well before is that tree keepers or individuals who've learned about tiny forests have then gone on to sign up to the STEM Ambassador Programme. And then they're able to go and share their knowledge and love within a school, within that sort of framework of being a STEM ambassador. And I constantly come across schools who are always on the lookout for something new and something different to kind of engage the children. So by having a STEM ambassador, schools are meeting their curriculum needs. So they're meeting their curriculum needs in terms of that sort of science outreach. But there's also, in most cases, certainly at primary and to a certain extent at secondary, there is a commitment that schools make to engage with people from the wider community. And this is an absolutely perfect way to do that. The next kind of level is what I've called extracurriculum. So where it's not tied to the sort of day-to-day work of, it's not tied to the day-to-day kind of teaching around the curriculum, but they're the extra outside activities that schools will put on to kind of support their children. So that can be an eco club, a gardening club, and to some extent things like art or poetry clubs as well, where you can link the tiny forest experience to those after school clubs. So you could take, the eco club could take on a responsibility of doing, say, some of the monitoring during the summer. It could be a thing they do every week. The gardening club could be there to make sure that the tiny forest is weeded, but also looked after. And the art and poetry clubs could use it as an inspiring space to be in. So it's about finding things that could be really useful and a great opportunity and a great space for people to use the tiny forest. From a parents' link perspective, I mean, this is, I'm wearing, I used to be a sort of school governor. I'm still a parent, but I stopped being the governor. One of the things that the primary school used to do a lot of was we would have like a Love Your School session, usually involved on a sort of a weekend day, where you would go in and help maintain school grounds or do some kind of improvement activity. And that could be, you could do that around the tiny forest. So it would be particularly if it's kind of on the school grounds or right next to it. And that's a great way to get parents involved, a great way to then talk to the parents about the tiny forest and what they're doing and how it's important. Maybe use that as then a starting point to inspire them to do something at home. So any kind of outreach about the tiny forest, there's a sort of classic way that it's often referred to as pester power. So kids are out every day doing stuff in their tiny forest. They can then they go back home and they go, Mom, Dad, this is why aren't we doing more of this? And it can kind of lead to that sort of connection between the tiny forest at school and maybe a very tiny forest at home in their garden. And also just kind of thinking a bit creatively around the tiny forest. So this is something I know Divya and I have talked a little bit about before, is you've got the actual tiny forest within. but there's also all that amazing space outside. And some of the locations have looked at putting different kind of wildflowers in, and different activities around that. One of the tiny forests, I think it's the one in Jersey, in constructing the tiny forest, the digger created a kind of a swathe of mud kind of leading up to the tiny forest, and the parents and teachers got very excited about that, and they just said, well, don't do anything with it, we'll make it a wildflower meadow. And so instantly they had this kind of great swathe of wildflowers connected. So there's kind of opportunities to think about, when a parent's coming into school, how can you kind of use that either end of the day, beginning of the day, to connect into them, and if the school's doing any particular weekend activities around the school, how can you kind of link them into that? And then the kind of fourth layer really is the kind of much broader community link. So how can the tiny forest site be used to kind of like hold a wildlife or tree celebration day, and the kind of school and children be invited into that? Is there an opportunity to combine a sort of school and a maintenance and a science day all in one go? And can the tiny forest be a kind of a central point for kind of well-being or arts walks, where you've got members of the community and potentially sort of the teachers and parents and children involved in that as well? So it's a kind of, it's a sort of scaling out really, in terms of what those activities might be. I mentioned the kind of education resources, so and I hasn't got the actual website on this, which I'll also come around to. So, but I'll make sure that we share this after it. So, if you haven't discovered them already, the Earthwatch Education Hub has all our resources on it. You need to kind of register and log in, but everything is free once you kind of get in there. There's a whole range of different things, but there's some very specific tiny forest activities, and on the screen here is an example of the Measuring Carbon with Schools activity. So you can download anything and use anything you like. Again, making teachers aware of it, and if necessary, printing stuff out and showing it, and kind of engaging the teachers that way. The other thing I was just going to highlight before I kind of move on was Earthwatch is currently developing the Green Earth Schools program, which is I kind of see it as a sort of complementary program to Tiny Forest, where schools have less space than that is needed for a tiny forest, or where they have a tiny forest and they want to kind of create some other activities around that. And this is currently being trialed. So what you see in front of you is hot off the press. And it's around, as you can see, one of the items is about a hedge. So it's how can you create small things like a hedge to kind of benefit nature and wildlife. And then the other, which is the Bugs Rock, is thinking about kind of activities that you can do to kind of really get the children to be creative in terms of their ideas. And so both of those, again, will be things that are accessible to teachers who are working on schools, but also you as tree keepers. If you kind of have your kind of suite of ideas and resources and options to hand, you can be there when the schools need them. And that was me. It was a sort of a whistle-stop tour. But what I really kind of wanted to do is to kind of open the floor to you guys to get a sense of how you currently connect in with schools, what maybe some of your biggest challenges are around connecting in with schools, and also in addition to that, what's worked really well, and whether you had any sort of particular questions or things that you just kind of run by the group in terms of what would help make it better.
Yeah, I think Steve also tried. I think Steve did some talks with his local schools.
I did, yeah. I did a group session last year. I did roughly about 6 schools in my local area, which is Hinckley, Leicestershire. And as I work for the local government anyway, it helped for me getting there, because obviously I maintain some of the school grounds, believe it or not, part of our contracts. So I got my head got my game in that way. But also I've been studying ecology, like separately. And obviously I'm a massive fan of permaculture and obviously like food forests and all that. So that's helped out. But I've been doing things, teaching the basic things of what trees do and what exactly is the role of a tree. But then also I've been going right up to Key Stage 3, which is the 11 to 14-year-olds, going into stuff like, okay, what's a food forest? What's this do? How can it be self-sustainable? What's an ecosystem? How can we treat things like that? And then also going from there, using events like Earth Day last year, I used as a good example. I used Earth Day and I got loads of people to come to a community list to pick a bit of colouring in session for lots of the younger kids, colouring these sheets I printed off like around like forest pictures and all that. Then also a bit of a talk inside the tiny forest itself, what this tiny forest actually does, where it stems from, what the idea is, where it's going to go with it. So yeah, I'm pretty engaged anyway, but it's just trying to get more, shall we say, trying to dig more.
Absolutely. And I love what you talked about there, Steve. So you've things like the sort of colouring in sheets is a brilliant way to kind of to get some of the younger kids really kind of engaged to start with. And then once they've sort of coloured in their sheets, I'm sure you've done it before, but it's really interesting to talk to the kids about why they colour things in a certain colour.
I've got children myself, so I do ask and I do watch them and observe a lot.
And it's absolutely brilliant, and it's that kind of starting point for sort of conversations, and then you can kind of go right. One of the things that I've done with some of the older kids was to get them. So we've got all the sort of tree ID guides that you've got access to, but actually a real challenge for some of the older ones is to get them to create their own guides. So to go to do observations, to give them each a notebook, get them to do observations. So they're drawing.
Some of the older ones, believe it or not, you just said that. Some of the older ones last year, especially the 12-year-olds plus, they have mobile phones, they have access. So I've been saying, how about Seek or iNaturalist and go through that? I've been recommending them sort of things as well, and like PlantNet and taking pictures on the phone and just submitting them and uploading. So, but yes.
Yeah, just different ways of doing it. So iNaturalist allows you to have groups. So you could do it for a particular tiny forest. You could create an iNaturalist group for your for one or all. You could do it for Leicestershire tiny forest, or you could just do it for one. And that's a really nice way of getting a picture of what's there, both in terms of species of trees, but also what other kind of wildlife is spotted. That works really well.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you.
I was doing an explorer session last night, and as a sideline, we found a big pile of, well, it looked like frog spawn, but its location made me think it could be toad spawn. So I was getting a couple of them to download Seek, and we were trying to see if we could work out through Seek whether it was,
identify it. Yes.
Yeah. It just said amphibian. It was like, oh.
It does. It's sometimes it can be a bit vague, and it can be something like it's not exactly what I know. I think I know what it is, but it's not that. And it's like, where do I go from here? But yeah, I know what you mean. So those kind of activities work well. Laura, is there any kind of stuff that you've done with schools that's worked really well for you?
So we were doing a couple of sort of online sessions just for our Leicester schools and getting the teachers to kind of take ownership, because what we wanted to move away from is them relying on us as a team. So I work as a team of 4, and we wanted to move away from them relying on us coming in to deliver the sessions and actually making sure that they're making use of the forest more often. So doing those sessions was really nice, because it kind of gives the staff a bit more confidence to go out for themselves and take the children out just on a more random basis rather than sort of scheduled with us. And we have a few more of those now sort of timetabled in throughout April and May. So I think that'll be really good for the schools, just to make sure that they're using them, and we can go through some of the education resources, the things that you've just said, and just passing on that knowledge so that there's people on site who are actually delivering those as well, which will be nice.
That's brilliant. And the feedback I always get is the more often they use the site, unsurprisingly, the more confident and comfortable they feel about going there. And it's also, I think anyone who's been involved in things like forest school as well, the more confident the children become about being there and what they're likely to see. And then if you give like the year 6s a chance to tell the year 2s what's going on, then you're kind of building that sort of confidence tree. in terms of knowledge about the tiny forest as well. There's always, if you can give some kind of activity or kudos to a year 6 about it, as particularly in coming up, I suppose, yeah, coming up to there before they leave, after their SATs and before they kind of move on to big school, if the year 6s can have some kind of focus activity that's theirs, and they almost like hand it on to the next year, that's a really nice kind of gesture, I think, that works well within schools.
I think
that's a really good point, actually.
Yeah, we have tried that in some of our planting days, where we have we call the year 6s did the planting first, and then we call them later on in the day to help the younger ones, teach them how to plant the trees and how to go about doing it, and they absolutely love it. And so they're just like, so then they're paying more attention when we are telling them about the methodology or how to plant it and all of that, and try to download that knowledge and pass it on to the younger guys as well. So yeah, that's a nice one.
Yeah, well, especially sort of post SATs, and I guess Leicester, you finish early as well compared to the rest of the second, not to Leicester. But I remember doing a session a few years ago with a year 6 group, and it was really interesting to ask them about their thoughts about the environment and environmental careers, and how they might link, and in this case, I'm thinking how they meant link that to the tiny forest. So again, you might use an activity at a tiny forest as a way of exploring what they want to do next. So you could get them, you could get to the tiny forest, and you kind of say, find something to do in the tiny forest that kind of represents what you'd like to do in your career, and kind of use it as a real visual kind of starting point to sort of get there.
Yeah, that'd be really nice. I think lots of the schools would appreciate that. Another thing that one of our schools has done has kind of given the forest to the year 4s, so they've made it the year 4 project, and then that year group has done lots of different activities around it, and they've related lots of their work. But one thing the year 4s were then tasked with doing was putting on a celebration day where the parents came in, and the kids had to present to the parents and say, this is our tiny forest, this is all about it, and teach them about it. And they created leaflets and posters and everything. So that was a really nice way of the school sort of engaging their community, and also giving the children that leadership opportunity, again, very similar to the year 6s as well. Yeah,
no, I really like that. Any kind of parents, schools increasingly have open days now to kind of try and promote how the great stuff they're doing. And if they can have I guess they don't even need to have a tiny forest display, do they? They just have a tiny forest. They say, come and do the tiny forest. And I've done it before where I've got them to create their own nature trail and sort of quiz that, so you can connect that to the tiny forest. So it would be like take the parents on a trail around the school and include some questions about, and then you could have kind of different things about the tiny forest. To see how much they were listening to what the students said.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, but that's another kind of attitude. But I like that as get the students to present to the parents about what tiny forest is. That's a great way of doing it.
I was just wondering about the technical, do the tree keepers have to get like a DBS check before approaching the schools? Are those some of the things that
I had to do an enhanced one. I did at the time of the disclosure, to just make sure I was obviously safe to be around children. Obviously, I've got kids that go to that school, but still they have to do it for their insurance as well.
So I think it's easier if you're a parent of one of the children. Like Steve said, you'd still need to be DBS'd, but it gives you the in, I suppose. And then the next level would be, if you're connected to the council. Obviously, Steve, you're a double whammy.
Yes, it helped a lot. Being in that position, like I've got access to the schools anyway, so it did help out to be able to speak to the caretaker. That got me a meeting with the head teacher, and then obviously from there we that's where we went to, and then got talking about trees, and before you know it, boom.
That's perfect. But I think you're right, Divya. I think any kind of activities where you'll be involved with kind of running any kind of session, you'll kind of need to be DBS checked. But though most schools wouldn't leave you alone with children, but it would give you an in. in the same way, the sort of STEM ambassador program that I've talked about, if you were doing that, you'd be DBS checked through that as well. So they're all kind of, they're sort of extra levels of security, really, in terms of access to schools.
Can you tell a little bit more about how they could sign up as a STEM ambassador? I think that is a good into the school, because a lot of them are finding it hard to kind of contact their local school, or
I will I'll send a link out. That's probably the easiest way to do it. So there's basically once you've signed in, you become part of a sort of a database of people that people can access. So that's kind of one way. So you could go anywhere, but you can also specify who you kind of like to connect to. But let me, there we go. Let me just get the right link. There we go. So this, I'm going to put a link in the chat, which is basically on the sort of STEM learning website. It gives you all the kind of bits and pieces that you need to do. You basically need to create an account and a bit of a backstory to who you are, and then you submit it, and all the kind of DBS checks that you need are done through them, and they're done for free. So it wouldn't cost you any more to do this. You get those kind of DBS checks for free. And you'll get a whole range of people becoming STEM ambassadors. And one of the great things through that program is you can then become part of the STEM ambassador community. So you get a bit more extra support around how you might do that. I know there's a number of Earthwatch staff members who are STEM ambassadors. And what's also really useful is you get to connect to other STEM ambassadors who can kind of help coach you through that kind of first opportunity to go into a school and talk. So it's a really inclusive way of kind of sort of stepping up a bit more in terms of sharing your knowledge. So I know anyone from kind of like very early career kind of researchers who want to develop their sort of skill set, get involved, but equally I've got a friend who's been a chemist for a I can't remember which company, I think it's for an oil company for a long time, but she wanted to kind of give back to the community, and that was her way of doing it. So she can go and talk about some of the chemistry behind plastics and all that kind of stuff. So there's sort of different ways into doing it. And what's great about the Tiny Forest piece is obviously there are the online training courses about Tiny Forest, the kind of the science behind the Tiny Forest, and you can kind of use all that kind of knowledge and your opportunity as a tree keeper to almost put together your own kind of package for what being a STEM ambassador for a Tiny Forest might look like. And that might be something we can explore a bit more, Divya, you know, in terms of how do we make sure that as Earthwatch we give you everything that you need to be a STEM ambassador for a Tiny Forest, and we can kind of let's look at what that involves. So what extra support can we do, because it's a great way to connect in with schools. It's something that they're really looking for, and it also is absolutely making the most of the resource that is a Tiny Forest.
Definitely, yeah, made a note of that. That's a lovely idea. And I'm just thinking, like, the other challenge I think would be to get in. I mean, as you said, if they have children that go, their own children who are going to the school, but if not, it might also be hard for other tree keepers to get in touch. So I'm thinking some of our project managers who worked on the Tiny Forest site have had some kind of contact with that local school. So they would have contacted them during the planting just to invite them to the planting. But yeah, of course, that's not the case with all of our planting sites, but with most of them, wherever we have managed to, you know, create these connections, I think we can definitely try to help if we can build those connections.
So, and in some cases, you are much more likely to get a connection if you physically go into the school. And if you can win over the school manager, the school secretary, that's half your battle done. The school secretaries are generally really good at shielding teachers from outsider input. So yeah, if you can just go into the school, explain a bit about what you're doing, and there's all sorts of resources that I know, Divya, that Tiny Forest has that kind of talk about what it is. Yeah, emails can more than often get sort of lost in the ether, or just deleted because there's just too many emails. So if you have an opportunity to go in and just say a little bit about yourself and the Tiny Forest, I said, hopefully the school already knows. And as Divya mentioned, programme managers will have gone through a process of trying to contact all the schools close to Tiny Forest before they were planted. So again, it might be worth getting hold of Earthwatch and just seeing who we've spoken to.
And Steve says parents' evenings are a great way to slip into the conversation. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, getting the right ear at the right time is half of the job done, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. Just going back to that sort of presentation or getting the children to sort of share the Tiny Forest. Quite often, if the school is having an open day where it's looking at attracting kind of new pupils or basically trying to showcase itself, a Tiny Forest could be an absolutely great kind of example of a resource that a school has, and might well be the bit that's, you know, kind of pushes a decision between a parent if they want to send their child to your school or not. So those are the things to kind of look for. So yeah, you're right, Steve. If you're at a parents' evening and sort of drop into conversation that you're a sort of Tiny Forest tree keeper, and yeah, when those kind of open evenings open up as opportunities, see if there's a way that you can kind of be there to kind of help promote the Tiny Forest at the same time.
Yes, I mean, they're like literally living, breathing laboratories, aren't they? I mean, children can literally see them grow. So yeah, I think they're like amazing opportunities for schools to be connected with Tiny Forest. So, and I think a lot of our Tiny Forest, the education resources also talk about these things. And I think we have another really good video about Tiny Forest into schools that was recently made by our education team. So
yeah,
I can try to pop that in the chat as well. So
yeah, again, it's often that sort of, if you get an opportunity to put a film in front of somebody, it goes a great way into explaining the kind of the benefits and the values of a Tiny Forest. Any other kind of thoughts or observations or potential challenges or kind of areas yet to explore?
I think for us, in terms of the challenges, the main one is just making sure that there's enough staff in the school to engage and maintain it. You know, if there's any sort of staff turnover, and there's not really a solution to that that we found, but that's just something that we're still working on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just trying to think from an Earthwatch perspective. It's how do we, and therefore I suppose how do you, in your kind of slightly step back role, kind of support the school and the teachers to engage more parents? So there's the sort of the classic, if you're doing any kind of activity off-site at a school, it's that the plea goes out for parental help and can anyone come along and do. It's how can we kind of encourage and support teachers to keep that regular ask going as well, because the more people that are then out supporting when they're at a Tiny Forest, the less stressful it's going to feel for the teachers, so that they can feel like they can enjoy the session and cover all the tasks that they want to do. So if you have any insight into that, Laura, in terms of how we can kind of support teachers to, what is it that they need to do to better sell it as a thing to get parents involved in, that would be something interesting to explore.
I mean, we can certainly ask.
Yeah.
And try to get some ideas. I think, yeah, it's always quite a tricky one. Yeah, but we can keep working on finding some solutions, definitely.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing that's really positive is where the concept of sort of tiny forests and all the things connected to it are really embedded in the school philosophy. So, you know, it has to really be brought into by senior management at schools. And generally it is a big investment in terms of time. So you'd like to think that that kind of senior investment is there. And the other thing which I haven't mentioned actually, which is ridiculous because I was one myself, is getting the school governors involved. That's another way in. So either you go in as a governor by stealth, as a tree keeper, but there's also I'm not suggesting you do another role, Steve, honestly, you already do too many. But yeah, if you can kind of, if you want to go in, that's another way that you can work to, and potentially you could present to the governors at a governors meeting a bit more about what the role of a tree keeper is, or how you might do more activities. And that's another way. And if you can win over some of the governors in terms of activities, then you've got another person who's on the ground, will be at school more often, can get much more involved, can be much more supportive of the teachers. That's another way in that can work quite well.
And I was also thinking, is summer holidays a good time, because there are a lot of parents looking for ways to engage their children, so maybe not directly through the school, but then you engage them during the summer holidays, and that kind of continues. Will that work, you think?
I think it depends on the setup. So for some schools, particularly if they've got any kind of raised beds or gardening, there's usually some poor parents and a gang of parents that get involved in doing the watering and the picking. So you could apply the same principle around the sort of tiny forest. For some schools, like when school's out, and anything that's even vaguely connected to the school is like, no thanks, I've got a summer holiday, I'm out of here. But it could be, particularly if it's a tiny forest that's within a school grounds or really, really close to it, that it is an opportunity for the school to connect in with a number of parents to sort of say, oh, could you be our sort of eyes and ears over the summer, and just, you know, and visit it and use it, and yeah, and kind of make the most of it, and maybe encourage it as a resource for the parents and the children. That might be a way to do it, but yeah, for some schools I'm sure it's like, nope, end of, yeah, finished, not interested.
I was just going to say on that, a good one that you put in your presentation that I noticed was like about wellbeing and mental health days. As some of these tiny forests are actually like on the school campus, you could actually say, right, shall we set up like a yoga or something, yoga for parents and children, like some sort of, you know, activity that parents can engage with the children, that we do inside the tiny forest, so we're surrounded by nature, because obviously nature's proven to heal, because we've got nature therapy now, that's on the NHS, for example, things like that. That's another way. But obviously in my situation, I've got tiny forests that are in local green spaces like parks, so I've got a lot of footfall coming through to the park itself, because I can be seen there, and then someone could come over to me and say, oh, what's this all about? And I can say, well, look at this board and I'm going to talk you through it. Here's a little QR code, scan that if you've got a mobile. That'll take you to everything you need to know. But all I'm doing is doing a tiny bit of weeding. You're more than happy to help me, or I'm picking up a bit of this, so you're more than happy to help me. And then come inside and I'll show you what it's all about. Have a sit down. And that's another way that if I engage with mine, I'll just be seen there to be doing something. But obviously I get a lot of footfall. But I mean, it's on school campus. I know it's a bit more awkward, but that's what I said about like parent and student yoga, and like mental health days, teachers coming on there, like teacher days, training days. Sometimes teachers have got children, they go to that school, oh, while I'm doing something in the school, oh, 25's there, why don't you go and explore? Go and take some photographs, and then possibly do like a write-up. What did you do over the summer holiday when you come back in the autumn term?
Yeah, it is. It's a great sort of space just to be. So although we talk about all the kind of science day, the planting days, which, you know, are very busy doing things, it's equally a space where things like meditation or yoga, or just being there, can be kind of a really powerful activity to get involved with. I know one of the things that we'd sort of looked at was, so quite a few local authorities do mental health walks. So either as part of sort of green prescribing, but also just as a local, the sort of local mind organisation will quite often have those. And if you can kind of find ways to do the mental health walks that go past the tiny forest, and then, like you've said, Steve, you know, you can scan the QR code as you're going past your tiny forest, you can find out a bit more. So in some respects, it's around, so this session's been about sort of integrating tiny forest to kind of schools and schools activities, but actually there is that kind of wider community perspective and finding ways to weave the tiny forest into kind of daily life that not only gets people connected through understanding the science and the research, but also as a just a space to be in, and an opportunity to kind of be there and reflect and not have to record anything, just to kind of enjoy the space that's there.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Any other questions?
Divya, I'm listening with great interest, and thank you, everybody. Thank you for the presentation and thank you for the great questions. People, apart from Divya, you would know, but for the Hammersmith and Fulham tiny forests, 2 of the 3 existing tiny forests are quite sort of inaccessible. So they're either locked away or currently behind a 4-month landscaping project by the council. So they're not kind of, you know, easily spotted. And I am pretty sure that apart from planting days, there's been no physical outreach. There may have been before my time, but no physical outreach to the schools. So I'm listening to all the suggestions, and I mean, apart from thinking they're all amazing, just wondering where on earth I would start. I don't have children. I don't have any links to the existing schools, and I'm not sure that many of the other tree keepers do either. So even just being able to access a list of the schools that were involved, I'm looking it up online as we're talking, and there's lots of schools near each of the sites, but which ones were invited to be involved in planting days, specifically attended, and just trying to build from there. I guess that would be the best first starting point. I would appreciate guidance from anybody on the call who's clearly got more experience than our crews do.
Definitely. So I think Emily would be a good person. So Emily was the program manager for all the Hammersmith and Fulham sites, and I think she's the one who's been reaching out to the school. So I'll definitely make sure I drop her a word. So
well, she's left, Divya. She hasn't been with council for about 6 months. Her replacement is relatively new, so they've been.
No. Sorry, the Earthwatch Emily.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking you meant Emily Tulloch. My apologies, and sorry to scare you.
No.
I thought I was announcing.
I didn't know that. I didn't know Emily had left.
Yep, I mean, I am on top of everything that goes on Earth for sure. Apologies, colleagues, apologies. No, I thought you meant Emily Tulloch. My apologies. Okay, so I can touch base with Emily and just give her
I'll also drop her a word. So I think I'll ask her to just get a list of all the schools that she has been in touch with together, and then also maybe give us a status on like where they are at right now, because as Sarah mentioned, like some of these contacts go cold because the schools are either too busy, or because I know that for Norman Park, I explicitly remember that the school, which is just on the other side of the park, they did come and plant the tiny forest. So there was some kind of contact that was established, but I can ask her to give us like, what happened after, because I think we did reach out again for the subsequent science days, and I'm not sure if they did turn up. So I can ask I'll
email her, Divya, and just copy you to it so that you know I've done it. That's really helpful to just know that, because if you can't actually get into the tiny forest, and the Norman Park example is tricky for access, then it's hard to offer anybody apart from the tree keepers an opportunity to engage.
But hopefully we are getting the new set of keys made up for all the tree keepers. So fingers crossed that will hopefully get ironed out. But then Hammersmith on the other side is another tricky business. So until they finish the development there, I think You got the most challenging side. I'm so sorry.
That's good.
But I like that that's not putting you off, Virginia. You're part of this call. You like a challenge. That's the way forward.
We've got Hammersmith and Fulham's committed to 10 tiny forests, and we've only got 3 so far. So we need a lot more, funding support clearly, but sites, engagement from a community perspective. So if we don't get it right at this stage, it's not going to bode well for more tiny forests in our borough. So let's see what we can achieve. But I appreciate everybody's suggestions today. Thank you so much for the content of the call.
You're very welcome. Any final thoughts or questions? There doesn't have to be. Or this is where Divya just asks the final question.
I think I've run out of my questions.
Obviously, if anything crops up, fine to sort of contact myself or Divya. We'll help where we can. And I'm very keen that as we kind of build this series of webinars that sort of Divya is creating to kind of support tree keepers, that anything that we learn as we go along, we will absolutely share. And so anything, any sort of top tips that get shared back, I will kind of add into any presentations. So for future reference, we can kind of build those sort of positive experiences along the way.
Yeah, and I was also planning to maybe put together something like a tree keeper toolkit or something, like just a Google Doc where we can put some flyers and stuff that you guys could edit. So I'm thinking, it's just about getting the time to put all these things together. But yeah, definitely in my to-do list. So I can make some flyers for the upcoming science days, or the citizen science surveys, individual ones, or I'll also make one for like general public, one for specifically for schools where we try to talk their language, just to include things like words like curriculum, throw it in there a couple of times, and and just have those ready. And we have some kind of slots where you guys can put in the details of your specific tiny forest and your contact details and things like that. That might make it easier. And also, as Sarah mentioned, some resources around tiny forest and that you could use to present it to your local schools and stuff. So I'll try to get it all in place, at least slowly to start off with, but then try to build a library of resources that you guys can tap into whenever you want.
No, absolutely. And just to sort of, I suppose, reassure Virginia is that obviously, you've got this kind of aim for 10, you've got 3 at the moment. Focus on one of the 3 that's easiest to start with, and learn from what works for that, and kind of build up. I think strength will come in numbers. So when you've got 10, one of the things that can be quite powerful, and I'm sure Laura, you've kind of find this within Leicester, is it's not necessarily competition between schools, but if schools can see what other schools are doing close to them and work out where they fit. Competition comes between how much wildlife you spot generally, or how tall your tree is. Those are the things you can kind of use as hooks to get the schools in and to get them involved. So we're with you on your journey, Virginia. We'll get you going, and once one's there, that'll be fine. The rest will just come flooding in.
I think, sorry, just building on that, absolutely right. Once one school sees that another school is using the tiny forest, then they're like, maybe I should do that, and then it just spreads, and it works really nicely, and then they just kind of do the work for you, and they're all involved. That's what you need.
The challenge seems smaller. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yes, definitely. We'll try to get some feedback from existing schools also, maybe. So that could be something that you guys could use, saying, there are other schools doing it, as Laura said. Use that as a bait. But thank you, everyone. School bait. But thank you, everyone. It's been
brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you, guys.
Take care. Bye.
Have a nice evening. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.